Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Laura. Welcome to my episode of Where Work Meets Life, where I'm going to speak with you about toxic bosses, the damage they do, and when to leave. So, why am I so interested in the topic of toxic bosses and doing something about it? Well, first of all, I can relate to toxic bosses at various points in my own career. And I've seen and felt the damage that these toxic bosses have done to so many of our clients at Canada Career Counseling. I see it in my consulting work. I see all different types of toxic situations, and I don't see it getting better. I see it eroding, and more of these toxic situations are cropping up. And I just think we need to do something about them. So, one of my first career experiences after I got my PhD was working in a consulting firm. And I had a boss who I didn't realize at that time, but I realized very soon after that she was very, very difficult and to some degree toxic. She was really a micromanager, and a micromanager isn't necessarily toxic, but they're a real pain in the butt. So she was that, but what she did do is she eroded my confidence in my first 6 weeks in that role. She had me do a presentation to our clients, and she was out of town while I was preparing. So I got the help of some of the other senior consultants, and I ended up delivering a session. And I'll never forget it because I would consider myself a fairly solid facilitator at that time. Could I have done better? Oh, probably. I mean, I was earlier in my career. Did I do terrible? Absolutely not. I felt pretty good after. I felt energized. People were asking good questions. The slides had good content. And she was in the room. So she got back from vacation and she was in the room. And after everyone left, she pulled me aside in front of two other consultants and basically tore me to shreds. And I'll never forget the feeling of not feeling good enough and just holding back tears. And you don't want to cry in those situations, but it was really hard to hold back tears and to feel that, oh my God, am I not good enough? My self esteem was bruised from that. But I ended up, talking to the other consultants about this woman, and it turned out she was known as the ice queen in the industry. People called her the ice queen because of her callous nature, her nastiness towards others, and wanting to control at all costs and being, an extreme micromanager. So her being away on vacation when I was prepping for that presentation just worked against me. But I had the courage, from within and, my supportive husband, etcetera, to say, "I don't need to put up with this. I need to get out and find another position," and I did. I only lasted 6 weeks there and never looked back other than to be able to have this story, to share with you about a toxic leader early in my career, and I've had others, but I really have become passionate about the fact that there's toxic bosses doing a lot of damage out there to people. So, what are toxic bosses? First of all, toxic bosses are bosses that are at any level of an organization. So, they can be supervisor all the way to the CEO, even the chair of the board, and they are impacting people through very difficult behavioral patterns. And there's different ways that they can come across, but some of the most common ones are abusive supervision, extreme narcissism, uh, gaslighting, making people feel like they're, forgetting things and maybe losing their mind. Passive aggressive behaviors can be at play and are often at play with these toxic bosses, but essentially they are eroding your confidence in yourself, and they are usually trying to derail your career. They may be threatened by you. They may decide to pit people against each other. So I see a lot of this in the research, where they like the team to not be getting along, and they like to have their favorites, and they have their in group and out group. They may they want to control and they like to punish. So they may punish you by not giving you the ability to go to a conference that's really important to you. They may not approve you for funding for a course. So taking away development opportunities, taking away perks that you might have had, and then of course they'll impact your pay, and they'll sometimes do what we call constructive dismissal. Well, it is called constructive dismissal out there, where they gradually decrease your responsibilities and make your role less what you signed up for, and take things away from you that are important to you, with the goal of getting you to quit, because they don't want to have to severance you out. They want you to quit. So if you're in this situation, know that it is not right. Constructive dismissal is not right. And if there's issues with your performance, you should be put on a performance plan. But a lot of times it's not performance, it's control, and it's toxic behaviors that are damaging you. And if you're under the toxic leader or toxic boss, because a toxic there's no such thing as a leader who is toxic. To be a leader, you need to be leading, inspiring, motivating human beings. A toxic boss does not do that. But essentially, if you are under a toxic boss, you'll notice impacts to yourself. You'll notice that you are no longer as productive or motivated or engaged. You start to lose engagement in your work. You may start to feel stressed, anxious, and it gets worse. These behaviors tend to unveil themselves, and then they tend to get worse over time. And I just see how much people suffer from these bosses. And a dear friend of mine actually suffered under a boss, and she was having a really great career journey, and she was doing well and kept getting more and more challenging assignments and growing. And she is very, very smart, hardworking, was building up a network in this large organization. And what happened was she ended up getting under a toxic boss. And very soon after, the behaviors started to come through. And I just really have felt for her going through this, because it just got worse and worse. And she tried to deal with it, tried to manage it, tried to please this boss, but he was definitely trying to work against her and trying to derail the career that she had worked really hard for. Because in her organization, she was building up a pension and building up really important traction that, if she had to leave, she would lose all of that. And that's what he was trying to do. And she had the courage to file a claim and go to HR. She went to HR, and that didn't work out in her favor, because he was actually in charge of all of HR as one of his responsibilities. But she also went through other avenues to file psychological harassment complaints and get an independent investigation done by a tribunal, and then is in the process of being in court against this leader. And not a lot of people have that courage. And I went to the courtroom to support her. And I would say that seeing a toxic boss in court who hires a very toxic lawyer, who tries to rip the person to shreds, it really is nasty. It's like re-bullying the person who was harassed. It was nasty. I felt my heart was impacted by it, and I was sure glad to be there to support her, and really, honored that she would, want me there as a source of support. But I really felt the emotions around that, and it's still going on. So by the time this episode airs, it'll still be going on, because it's a long road to try to take down one of these toxic bosses at a senior level in an organization, especially if the president is supporting them, and the president doesn't see through that. So, with toxic leadership, it's really interesting that if you have toxicity at the top, it tends to cascade through. And it's the abdication of leadership is what it is. It's letting the bullies, the the abusers, the narcissists, the passive aggressive ones who are trying to derail people's sense of self-worth, sense of confidence. They're trying to derail this, and they're they're getting away with it because all the way to the top of the organization, including the board, they're not doing what they need to be doing, is understanding what's going on in the organization, what's going on in the culture, and really flagging when a leader has multiple people exiting under them. I call that a hot spot. That's a hot spot that needs to be immediately looked into. But we don't see that happening enough. And I'm hoping my research and my writing, my book, all of that will give practical strategies and calls to action for organizations. Are you ready to transform your life through laughter, lifelong learning, and a little bit of improv magic? Well, get ready, because the Improve It podcast with Erin Diel is here to add a dose of playfulness to your Wednesdays. Erin sits down with development gurus to explore the pesky and beautiful aspects of life. They dive deep into things that make us tick, laugh, and sometimes even cringe. Above all, Erin's mission is to remind you that no one is you, and that is your superpower. But here's the twist. With over 13 years of improv experience, Erin infuses every episode with a playful spirit. Get ready for tangible techniques to transform yourself through the power of play. You can find the link to the Improve It podcast in my show notes, or go to learntoimproveit.com, Apple or Spotify, and subscribe today. But aside from the organizational piece of this, which is a huge beast of its own to deal with, there's the individual, and that's you. And you may be suffering under a toxic boss, or one of your loved ones might be. And what happens is you start to see all these impacts on the person. They're dreading going to the office on a Monday. They are increasingly not sleeping well. And when you're not sleeping well, that impacts everything. That impacts your ability to think clearly. That impacts your emotionality and your reactivity to things. It really does a lot of damage. So you're not sleeping. You're worried about going to see this boss or to work with this boss, and things continue to deplete. The behaviors are unpredictable. So oftentimes you just don't know what to expect. It can be a Jekyll and Hyde situation sometimes. Each of these toxic bosses play things out a little bit differently. There's some unique elements to each, but there's also patterns that I'm seeing through the research. And I'll be sharing and writing more about these patterns. But I would say it becomes worse over time, and it's not going to be fixed. And 9 times out of 10, if you take it to HR is involved, and they're controlled by the higher levels of toxic leadership. Um, and HR wants to help. They may want to help, but they may not be empowered to help. So just be very, very careful before going to HR that if they have a clear policy around psychological harassment, bullying, respectful workplace, and if there are other cases where other people have been successfully helped by HR. And if that hasn't happened, then I'd be very, very cautious. But more importantly, you need to take care of you. So the toxic boss in an ideal world would be let go. They would find out how much damage this person has done to you, but also to others. They would say, we don't want a leader like this, even if they're doing well, like in their job. How many people are they damaging? And in the end, that's not good for performance and productivity. So even if they're smart, even if they bring in dollars, the extent of damage that they can do, especially the more senior they get, I just really think organizations need to weigh the pros and cons of keeping this type of person. In an ideal world, they would be let go. But unfortunately, it's a very complex web. It's like a spider's web of politics and egos and undercurrents of who's friends with who's related to who. You support me, I support you. And then ostriching. Ostriching is, I don't want to know that. That's 2 levels down from me. I don't need to know that. That's his problem. And then all of a sudden what you get is these uh, hotbeds of toxic behaviors that can run rampant. So, in other words, if you think that staying it'll get better, no, it won't. Staying, they'll get rid of the boss, maybe, but probably not. You need to be looking beyond the organization. You may be able to do a lateral move within the organization. Some organizations have these toxic departments or areas, and then another department is not toxic. So sometimes that can happen, and that's all about who is leading the department and who is creating the culture in that department, which can change over time as toxic bosses come in and out. So you have to realize that everything is impermanent in organizations and in life. So you have to be ready and resilient to know when it's time to go, when it's time to move. When it's time to make a lateral move, try to move within if you can. But maybe the whole organization is toxic and it's time to look outside the organization and apply for other positions, start to network. If you let it go too long, if you stay with a toxic boss too long, what happens, and I've seen it in our research, is that you become less and less energized and motivated, and you lose your sense of confidence, and it makes it more and more difficult to get out there and network and to look for another position. So at the earliest warning signs of your boss being toxic, kind of like my ice queen story at the beginning, she tore me to shreds. I felt belittled. I felt not good enough. When you feel that, that's the time to get out of Dodge. And I know this is easier said than done. You may have invested a lot of time in the organization. You may have a pension built up, shares and stock options. So you have to weigh the pros and the cons. So my well-being physically, mentally, emotionally and spiritually versus my financial situation. And both I would say are important, but we need to look at over time um how these two things weigh out, and are there other ways of making up the difference if you do walk away from a pension. Are there different ways of investing and making things work out for you so that you can be mentally, physically, emotionally and spiritually well, and also not worried about finances, like crazy, which will erode your well-being. So it's not an easy decision. Talking to a mentor that you trust, having a mentor is so key. Talking to a career psychologist, career counselor can be super key, because if you end up talking to a friend or your spouse over and over, you may feel like you're a broken record and you're going around in circles. And it's important to have the support of loved ones, but it's also important to have the objective view of the world of work and what are your options, what can you do, when to involve a lawyer. You need to think that through as well, because if it is constructive dismissal, you may have a case there. But I really feel for you if you're going through this. I'm just really honored to be doing this toxic boss research project, the behaviors and impacts of toxic leaders. And myself and my research assistant have been working really hard interviewing people from across North America, across industries, and across levels to really understand what are the stories, what are the behaviors, what are the strategies that work and don't work, and how to heal when you leave these toxic bosses. So stay tuned. I will be speaking about this, writing about this, bringing on experts in this whole arena. It's one of my passion topics, and I feel like if we can make human lives a little bit better by having fewer toxic bosses and having to report to them for less time, then that's a difference that I'm happy to make. And I just wish you all the best. Feel free to reach out to me, share this episode with others who may be going through these turbulent times. And I hope you stay well. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Where Work Meets Life. If you found this content valuable, please rate and review the episode and share with others who may benefit. Visit me on my website at drlaura.live and sign up for my monthly e-newsletter full of tips and resources. I'm also a passionate keynote speaker and would be delighted to speak with you on your speaking needs. Stay well.